I mean, when for you as a young, woman, kind of having your intuition pop up for you, what was that process like for you, Zita? I mean, you had to go through similar things, I would think.
I did. I mean, I remember being very young, to the point where, kind of an odd recollection of it, but how I remember it all starting, vividly starting, is I was sitting in front of the TV set, and we were watching something. I don't remember what it was, but a commercial came on, and it was, we're about the same age. So do you remember when Judy Garland had her variety show on TV?
Yeah, I do. I was a little boy, but I remember that.
Yeah, sure. Okay. So I'm watching TV, and I don't remember a day. I just remember it being nighttime. I remember it being dark, and the room was dark because we always watched TV with the lights off at that point. And her commercial came up to promote her show, and I turned around, looked at my mother, and I said, "They're going to find her sleeping in the bathtub." Now, I was probably 5 or 6 at that time. I predicted her death. I predicted Marilyn Monroe's, and I predicted, what's his name? I want to say Benny Goodman, but that's not it. Bing Crosby. Within weeks of each other. I would say this one is going to be gone, and a week or so later they would discover, the report would come out. So my mother was also very psychic and a very, very strong medium, and she was pretty well known here in the circle. And she looked at me and she said, "I just want you to be careful." She said, "I don't want you to stop what you're doing, but I want you to be careful of who you say these things to, because I don't want you to get in trouble." That was my first recollection. And from that, some tragedies hit our family. And through that, we had to kind of experience different emotions and different things. And as a 9-year-old, I shut down. I completely shut down, as did the rest of my family, up until probably 8 or 10 years ago. Then really unbeknownst to me, it was not really being intuitive or being psychic or whatever. I kind of turned into a life coach with a lot of people, and not necessarily friends or family, but it turned into being people that I didn't know. And through that, I was giving small predictions or some past life information or current past life experiences that drew them to where they are now and helping them get over to that edge. So growing up like that, it was just normal for me. It's not something that I do consciously. It's something that just happens when it's meant to happen. So our experiences are very different. I had my first official reading, when I was probably 14, and that was by Mickey Danes. I'll never forget it. It was at the Holiday Inn Tiki Room, downtown Minneapolis. And it was her, and I can't think of the gentleman's name now. I'll think of it later, who was also very popular at that time, and they traveled together. And that was my first reading, and she told me that I would be doing all the things I'm doing now. So it's fascinating on how it all works out.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I know her not real well. I've talked to her. Of course, I know her daughter really well.
Right.
I'm friends with Jill. And I did a radio show with Nikki, gosh, a long time ago, 6-7 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just like flirting with her and having a good time with her. She was fun. I liked her.
Yeah.
And, but, with Jill, I know Jill really well, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you probably know Jill really well, too.
Yeah.
It's interesting how, that kind of passes on, right? So you have your mother's medium, and you have a reading with Mickey Dane, who become friends with her daughter, who's also very well-known, super talented psychic, Jill Dane,
mm-hmm.
America's #1 love psychic, and I love Jill. She's fun.
I do too.
So it's interesting, right? How the kind of the circle goes on. It's fascinating too, when you think about it as a child. I'm going to tell you, I don't know if I've told you this story, but I think it's a good story. When I was a little boy, I was kind of chubby. And I hated that. And my mother, she kind of did this to me, right? And so I'm watching a TV show. I watched the TV show Daniel Boone. I don't know if you remember Daniel Boone. I think it was
absolutely,
Daniel Boone.
yeah.
And I see this actor on, and I thought he was the best-looking actor I'd ever seen. And I thought to myself, one day I wish I could look like him. I remember thinking this, like, when you wish upon a star kind of thing. I wish I could look like him. And the guy's name was John Davidson.
Oh, absolutely.
Remember John Davidson?
Oh, yeah, I've met him, yeah.
Okay. When I was in college, my name was John Davidson.
Mm-hmm. I can see the
resemblance.
resemblance.
I promise you.
Yeah.
John Davidson and I were twins.
Yeah,
we
absolutely.
didn't sort of look alike. I would go places and people would ask my autograph. I was in Reno and I walked into a lounge in Harris, and they go, "Oh, we want to welcome our celebrity guest." I'm looking around, John Davidson. I'm like, "Okay, great, fabulous." That was one. And there's only one other thing I remember as a child seeing on TV and wishing that I could have, and that it was on a show. I was about 10 years old. They did a special on psychics. I don't know, psychic from anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
And they had a bunch of like Russian psychics and stuff. Like back then there were all these experiments, and they had this special on like ABC or whatever. And I watched it and I go, "Wow, that's fascinating. That's so cool. I wish I could be psychic someday." And I kind of like wish upon a star kind of thing. The only two things I remember having that, like, oh my God, wouldn't it just be wonderful? I didn't want a car or a truck or a bike or anything else. I wanted to look like John Davidson, and I wanted to be psychic.
Mm-hmm.
And poof, my nickname was John Davidson, and I'm sort of, that's what I do. That's my job. I'm a psychic.
Right.
It's weird, right?
It is. See, and I think it's kind of cool too, because you grew up in an atmosphere where you weren't surrounded by psychics and medium.
No,
where
nobody was, and they weren't down with me doing it. I gotta tell you.
Oh yeah, and see, the paradox in my family is that we're Catholic. We are Irish Catholic. My relatives, my grandmother and my aunts and my uncles would not have accepted this whatsoever. But my mother was very psychic, and I have two sisters who are very psychic, and I have a nephew who's very psychic. So we grew up, after my dad was killed, we grew up with having psychics, tarot readers, palm readers. We had the Ouija board. We had a whole drawer full of tarot cards of different styles and things. It wasn't uncommon for a group of these people coming into our home on a daily basis, and not giving readings or anything, but just talking. So we grew up in this very divided, going to church every Sunday being the Catholic side, and then coming home and being a spiritual side. The hardest part for me growing up was combining the two. Going to Mass on Sunday and them basically telling us that we're going to go to hell no matter what we do, and all of this that we do is Satan. And going back home, and when we're talking to angels and we're talking to people who have passed away, and it was very confusing for me, because if I can't pray to my relatives who have passed away and talk to them, why is it okay for me to pray and talk to an angel who I've never met? So I went through that whole experience through 9 years of parochial school, divided, to the point where I actually just attended a confirmation for my niece a couple weeks ago. And I'm sitting there listening to the homily from our Archbishop and thinking, I cannot profess that there is only one God. There is one being, but whether I call him God, whether I call him Buddha, whether I call him a rock, that's not my choice, or that's my choice of what I call that person. And if I can't profess my faith to that one God, then I'm going to hell. And so I'm going, I can't buy into this organized religion with the faith that I believe in. I'm very much of a Christian. I believe in a Jesus Christ. I believe that he existed. But I don't believe in all of the myths that surround him. So there's that dichotomy that goes on when you get into this kind of a field of those personalities that you fight with. Did you ever have to go through that?
Well, mine went through a totally different thing, right? Because I didn't have any of that as a child. So I had a very, I always joke that I'm like an immigrant child, and that my family's from the South, and I lived in the North. So they blended like not at all, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it was complicated for me in that I was a very precocious, like child genius-y kind of kid, and my father was a very smart man, but he worked in a factory. My mother, not a rocket scientist, but very pretty and friendly and all, and they were from the South, and and so they had a completely different mindset.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And they were not on board with anything. They would be more for redneck hillbilly sort of energy,
Sure.
if you want to stereotype them. And so I was truly from another planet to them.
Yeah.
They did not get me at all, and tried to suppress all that. They wanted me to work in a factory and do all that stuff. My father, I'm getting him in honors, and my father wants me to go to trade school. They don't understand me, right? So, so when this happened, my father already died by the time this happened. So my mother just did not get why I went to California, why I'm doing these weird things, and telling her about it. And I'm trying to explain to her that I'm going through this spiritual thing. Well, to her, that meant that I was going to be like a Baptist preacher or something.
Right.
To her, that's what that's what was going to come out of this, right? That she could relate to. But it wasn't what I was doing, and so even still, my family just don't get. They don't understand what I'm about, and don't accept it, and it's a conflict. It's a serious conflict. And so I had to embrace that black sheep thing. So I didn't have, I wasn't surrounded with it at all. In fact, just the opposite. It was totally taboo. Nobody went there.
Yeah.
So when I started talking about this stuff, they didn't know what I was talking about. They still, my family still thinks I'm a charlatan. That they can't possibly be true.
Right.
They can't, that basically I con these people. That's how they see it. That what I do can't be true.
And it's unfortunate that that's what so many people in society think. I don't think it's as bad as it used to be. I think it's even more so accepting now than it ever has, but I think we're going kind of back to the 60s where it's a topic that people talk about. But I always think of if my dad had not been killed, if he'd be living, how different we would be now without that background. Without the spirituality that we grew up with. We'd be very, very different women than where we are. So it's fascinating.
Yeah, you have the sets of experiences in which you have, and again that frames the way you understand things. There's purpose to it, right? There's a trajectory that comes out of it.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't have it given to me. I had to fight for it. I had to sacrifice a lot to get it. And I think in a lot of respects, it goes down to how much do you want it.
Right. Exactly.
And I didn't necessarily want it